Hello friends, it is Monday. That means it's time for a Q&A. For those of you just joining us, the rules are very simple. All you have to do is leave your questions down below, and hopefully they'll be answered on next week's show. And I've actually got a task for you guys this week. So, I'm currently halfway done with a script on, believe it or not, Left 4 Dead. It's kind of a retrospective on the game, as well as kind of like an overview of what that Last Stand update was, as well as kind of why I think Left 4 Dead 2 might be a masterpiece, an almost flawless game. And in order to make sure that I can get it done this week, I'll need you guys to be on my ass about it, alright? It's gotta come out this week. I need to finish it, and yeah, hold me accountable, everybody. So, we're gonna kick this week off with a question from Boogie Radio, who says, Q&A, I have always heard that people want the old Magnum back. However, in a sandbox like Halo, I think a classic Magnum, battle rifle, and Covenant carbine, if they are all to return, inflate the sandbox. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. So as far as the topic of the Magnum returning goes, that sidekick pistol that we saw, mechanically I didn't mind it. It was actually borrowing a lot of traits from what I found to be one of the more interesting weapons in Halo 5 sandbox, the sidearm Magnum, which is kind of like this dinky little thing. It's not very good at killing people, but its special trait is that it swaps really fast and reloads really fast, so it truly is living up to its name as a sidearm. And my only problem really with the sidekick is it's boring looking. I would not mind mechanically if it was exactly the same, but it kind of looked like the Magnum. That would honestly fix a lot of my problems for it. When Halo 2 came out, the Covenant carbine was essentially kind of a solution to a problem of Arbiter being a playable character. All of the Covenant weaponry was designed to be fired at the player. They were all projectile weapons, they were very good at stripping shields, but also weren't too great at properly killing. That way the player had a little bit of wiggle room when their shields were down. And it also made it kind of interesting when you picked them up and turned them on the Covenant, because it encouraged you to swap between weapons. Use the plasma rifle to drain the shields and then switch to a kinetic weapon like the battle rifle or something to finish them off. When you're playing as the Arbiter, you can't just have Covenant weapons. Like Combat Evolved, that would be terrible. The pacing would be completely off. So they gave the Covenant a couple of equivalents to the UNSC. So the Covenant Carbine was their precision weapon like the battle rifle. It was the kinetic thing you could switch to for a headshot. Same with the beam rifle. It was their version of the sniper rifle. The problem then going on as the series progressed is that as you return to the UNSC's point of view, the Covenant now have a lot of, copies of UNSC kinetic weapons, mechanically. And then the problem got even worse with the Prometheans, where they had a battle rifle, but it was orange. They had a shotgun, but it was orange. They had a rocket launcher, but it was orange, and so on. And then you kind of get to Halo 5, where how many rocket launcher equivalents does that game have? Like 12 or something? It's ridiculous. There's a lot of explosives in that game. There's a lot of shotguns in that game. Think back to Combat Evolved. Think about when you find a shotgun. The reason that finding a weapon in that game was such a big deal is because it was the only one of that kind. The shotgun was the shotgun in Combat Evolved. Same with the rocket launcher. There were no other. There were no overlap between weapon roles. And kind of that got lost as the series went on. Finding a rocket launcher really isn't that special in Halo 5 because they're everywhere in that game. There's so many of them, I can't even name them all off the top of my head. So something exciting about the Banished is that we've never seen their arsenal in first person. A lot of expectations are right now gone. I mean, we have seen the plasma pistol as well as the needler, which are kind of like standard Halo weapons. But that little mangler thing, that was different. We haven't seen that before. We saw the silhouette and it's the Mauler, but then what we see is a weapon that acts more like the Magnum from Combat Evolved. It's this slow firing, super heavy hitting weapon, and then we see that burst weapon, which, I mean, we'll see how they play, but I am appreciating that there seems to be an attempt to separate the Banished arsenal creatively from the UNSC arsenal. So we're gonna have to see how it plays out, but I'm already feeling a little bit positive about the direction we're going in. The execution, obviously, we'll see how it plays out. But I hope that answered your question. The next question comes from Slick, who says, Q&A. Hey Late Night Gaming, I've been thinking about this for a while, but in Halo Infinite we are shown a map and we see a bounty for a specific enemy, which got me to think about how Halo Infinite could handle boss battles. I know the series never had great boss battles, but given how different Infinite seems to be, do you think they could learn from games like Destiny, Doom, and even Metal Gear and take another stab at bosses? So, I think the problem is that every time Halo has attempted to do bosses, they do it like other games, and that's what doesn't make them work. Halo needs to modify the idea of a boss to work within Halo's sandbox. So Halo kind of operates on like a 30 seconds of fun thing. Enemies usually are never alive for too long. The player usually clears out a room in less than a minute. You're swapping between weapons. There's a reason they call it the Covenant Dance. It's this interesting rhythm you get into where you're bobbing and weaving, switching between weapons, using all these different tools against the enemies and systematically taking them all down, and then the room is clear, the dust has settled, and there's just alien bodies everywhere, and you feel really cool. The problem with the boss is it's usually a prolonged fight. It is deliberately overstaying its welcome, and it's challenging the player mechanically. So in Portal, the boss fights in that were kind of interesting because they're testing your knowledge of how the portal systems work, how the physics objects work, and you're kind of on-the-fly puzzle solving while being under assault by an aggressive threat. And with Halo, I think its most creative and most successful boss battle was actually the Scarab in Halo 3. I think it's one of the most creative ideas in Halo ever, and it's kind of sad that Halo never revisited it. Because the boss wasn't this large thing with a huge, just pile of health that you have to drain, like, oh, bring it to its knees, shoot its weak point, it's getting back up again, we're in phase 2 of the boss fight. No, it's a sandbox puzzle. You're presented with this large thing that's stomping around, and all you have to do is get to its weak point, and it's instantly crippled. You instantly win. The problem is, how are you going to use the sandbox around you to get to that weak point? So it's less of a firefight, and it is more of it's almost like Portal. You're problem solving on the fly. And something that I do think could be interesting is if Halo Infinite took that route. So a named boss battle, like a bounty or something, instead of making it an elite with super shields or something, put the elite behind a shield, like it's being protected by something, and have a whole bunch of things in the environment. You gotta cross wires here and there while defending yourself from jackals. Like, basically make the process of taking down the elite the adventure in its own. The bounty is getting to the elite, not sitting there for 5 minutes unloading plasma rounds into its shield until they finally burst. That's at least how I would handle it. And in order to promote discussion, I want you guys to pitch me a boss battle. The rule is this thing cannot be a bullet sponge. Make it interesting. The next question comes from Double Camera 51, who says, Q&A. Do you think we will see other stories in Halo Infinite, kind of like how Halo 3 had ODST? So if I'm reading this correctly, you're kind of talking about side games, kind of like how Halo 3 had this spin-off in the Halo 3 engine called ODST. It obviously used a lot of Halo 3 systems, but it told a very different kind of story. I'd actually like that. I like low-budget AAA games, if that makes any sense, that are usually kind of like cobbled together with leftover assets and resources from something else. Like, Fallout New Vegas was essentially thrown together with Fallout 3 assets, and I do think that the fact that they didn't need to properly build a new game from the ground up, they had a kind of a head start, so to speak, because the engine was there, a lot of the assets were already there. I think that makes games a little bit more interesting. So, taking something like the Halo 5 engine, I'd like to see 343 make a smaller scale spin-off game in that Halo 5 engine using Halo 5 assets and stuff. That way they have that head start. When Halo Infinite comes out, I'd like to see some of that stuff. And honestly, I would pay for it. I really like single-player DLC. I can't get enough of it. And what's kind of fun about some of those things is that over time you get used to the way that a game graphically looks. It feels very much at home. So with Halo 3 ODST, the fact it literally just looks like Halo 3 graphically, it feels already at home. it's kind of interesting. It's like the lack of a graphical upgrade doesn't bother me. And in fact, I actually think it strengthens the game to an extent because it's immediately very familiar, but the context of what you're doing is a little bit different. So you're like, all right, I'm in Halo 3, but this is weird, this is different, and it makes it feel a little bit more immersive. It encourages that exploration a little bit more. It's cool. I'd like to see something like that from Halo. I hope that answered your question. And the next question comes from Nathan Peterson, who says, Q&A, what defines Halo for you? What is it about something that says, I'm Halo to you? So, what makes Halo Halo is a very subjective thing because Halo impacted us all in very different ways when we played it for the first time. So for me, what impacts Halo had on me the most were the music, the Gregorian chanting, because as a kid, I went to Russian Orthodox churches a lot. So the choir, those kind of religious hymns, that was very much a part of my childhood. So loading up the Halo main menu and hearing that and seeing a ring, a very kind of religious-y looking image, boom, I was instantly in. But there are some people that weren't too affected by the Halo theme. They were more interested in the literal science fiction of the universe. I think sometimes we get confused when we're talking about what Halo is, what its spirit is, because we assume that other people had those same emotional connections that we did. And it's interesting to hear other people talk about what resonates with them, what about Halo really spoke to them. So for me, when I think of the UNSC, that kind of part of Halo, Sierra 117 and the Truth and Reconciliation immediately come to mind, like those levels from Combat Evolved and Halo 3. The idea of moving through these thick, organic environments with sprinklings of artificiality, whether it be Covenant stuff, human stuff, but the idea of kind of like hearing the alien calls off in the distance, hearing the music in your ears that's very ethereal and kind of otherworldly. Looking into the skybox and seeing these UFOs flying around and stuff and, hunting aliens, hiding in the bushes and stuff. That's the stuff I really like. I like following my Marine squad, hearing them banter and stuff, hearing them look up to me when we're pinned in a firefight and I clear out the alien horde. It's fun. That's what the UNSC is to me. It's that kind of like guerrilla tactics of fighting an alien threat in a very organic and natural environment. When it comes to the Forerunner stuff, what I really like is a lot of the lights have been off for a very long time. So in kind of serving in a church when I was young, I was an altar boy for the Russian Orthodox Church in Washington, D.C. Once the service was over, we'd have to do a lot of cleaning, we'd have to do a lot of sweeping and stuff. So realizing that an hour previously, this huge church was full of religious hymns and songs and choirs chanting and stuff, and now all the lights are off. And like each footfall reverbs throughout this huge church. It was very just kind of like interesting, and that's the kind of feeling that I get from Forerunner stuff. The idea of looking around at these massive obelisks, these huge stone structures, these softly glowing lights, and thinking thousands of years ago, this place was probably full of life, full of Forerunners singing these hymns to the stars and stuff, and it's like, now all the lights are off and all that's left are my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. That's what the Forerunners mean to me. And the Covenant now are kind of on the opposite spectrum of that, where the Covenant very much remind me of morning liturgy, where now the church is alive, the bronze is reflecting the candles and the lights and stuff, the choirs are going completely crazy, our priests in the Russian Orthodox faith look very funny, they're completely over the top, they're covered in like all of this stuff, in fact it kind of like eerily looks like the prophets from Halo. They're just like covered in all this religious iconography, and that's kind of what the Covenant are for me. They're a religious organization. Like their battle armor both functions as priestly religious leader like garb as well as just armor to protect themselves. Yeah, that's kind of what the Covenant are to me. I hope that answered your question. And the next question comes from Dirty Belter, who says, Q&A. Do you plan to do any videos on the Marathon Trilogy or any other Bungie games? Also, what are your thoughts on their other games pre-Halo? So, as far as Marathon goes, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I almost beat the first marathon game, but it beat me in the end. My conclusion was that, wow, the original Doom was a lot better than this. But I'm a very different person now a couple years later, and I do want to revisit it and see if it can actually click with me. And if there are any hardcore marathon fans in the comment section, please reach out to me on Twitter or even the comments. If you are a super marathon nerd, you know the lore, you know the story, you know the mechanics and the intricacies like the back of your hand, please reach out to me and please educate me. I want to absorb your knowledge so that I can go into the marathon games feeling like I'm ready for what they have to bring. And I do want to make a video on them properly. As far as some of Bungie's other games, Destiny I'm actually a huge fan of, and I'm thinking about doing a video on learning to love Destiny as somebody who did not like the first game, and as somebody who is, a Halo fan, like getting over that kind of stepmom syndrome that, like, you're not my real mom, I miss Halo, like kind of getting over that and, just appreciating what Destiny is. So the next question comes from Xeno Prisma, who says, do you think that there will be another Covenant Splinter faction in Infinite? And if so, how do you think it should be done? Alright, so Splinter factions, I'm very exhausted with Covenant Splinter factions, not because they're a bad idea, but more so, there needs to be something more. We can't keep doing Splinter factions, as well as just for the onboarding process. So something that's constantly in the back of my mind is Halo is very old now as a franchise. It's getting close to 20 years old. And in order to bring new fans on, we need to also think about conclusions to things. That way we can move on to new stuff. As far as the Covenant go, in 2007, the Covenant Empire fell. We killed the Prophet of Truth, and ever since then, we've been dealing with the fallout. So when you've got people jumping into Halo for the first time, because entire generations of kids have grown up since 2007 and are getting into Halo now. And they're being bombarded with this, oh, the Arbiter, don't worry, he has this really complicated history. Oh, the Covenant Splinter factions, the reason they're called that is because back in the original Halo trilogy, so on and so on and so on. We've got to start thinking about how we can streamline the Halo universe, put a neat bow on certain things, and start to move on to new things. And that's kind of actually why the Banished excite me so much, because the Banished, they do have their ties to the Covenant, but they are very different. They don't even use the Covenant name. They kind of borrow that same aesthetic because we do love shooting aliens, but the Banished are something new for us to go after in the future. And I'm interested to see if the Banished are very accessible for new fans and stuff as an antagonist. They don't feel like they have to watch 3 hours of Halo YouTube lore in order to figure out what the Halo universe exactly is, if that makes sense. It's kind of actually very similar to the Batman Arkham games. They do something that's very good, which is they take a character like Batman who has almost 100 years of history now under his belt. I mean, that's a bit of a hyperbole, but you get my idea. And they are just like, no, he's Batman. Don't worry about it. Like, don't worry. It doesn't overwhelm you with series history. It allows you to kind of jump in and understand the story very quickly. And I'm hoping Halo Infinite kind of achieves that. And that's kind of my opinion. I hope we're going to start seeing the end of Covenant Splinter factions, and we're just going to move on to something new. So this comes from Soul Handler, who says, Q&A. What are the terms to use licensed music on YouTube? Is there a way to use it fairly? I want to start my own YouTube channel, but that's one of my main concerns. So, something that I actually do for music is I try not to ever use official soundtrack stuff. In fact, I'll go out of my way to try to find game rips of soundtrack. I use a lot of the different stems from like Halo 3. You can find like unreleased OSTs online where people will kind of go in, find a way to mute the background audio, and just record the music looping during certain parts of Halo missions. What's nice about the MCC on PC is you have the ability to turn off sound effect audio as well as voice audio and just have that music playing. I'll sometimes do that, record it for about 3 minutes, and then I'll save that to my iTunes. I'm like, there you go, buddy. And something I'm actually starting to do now with the help of a friend is I'm starting to make some of my own Halo music for the background of videos. And it's really cool. She's been a pretty huge inspiration, and some of her music is awesome. Currently, she has a very, very spooky version of the Halo theme on her channel. I'll link it down below. It's really cool. It sounds like something that you play at a Halloween party. I think I'm going to end the video on a piece of music that I call Cosmic Vigil. And I made it trying to articulate what it is about Halo music that's important to me. Because I don't have any musical experience, so I don't have the vocabulary to explain what Halo music should sound like, in my opinion. So I just took to GarageBand on my Mac and made it. And I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. And yeah, I can just end it there, but guys, I hope that answered all of your questions. I hope that you all have a good week, and hopefully I'll see you when the Left 4 Dead video is done. Take care.